In the coming video, I will be talking about the poem The Solitary Reaper, written by William Wordsworth. And in the presentation, I will first off explain the ideas of the Romantic Age and some of Wordsworth's philosophies and like ideas. Some of his ideas, you get it. And then I will kind of get into the poem and each stanza of the poem, and here we'll look at how the poem kind of reflects some Wordsworth's philosophies and how the poem develops through the stanzas, like from the beginning to the ending. And I will also shortly get into how the poem is framed by the author, because I think there's something interesting about this, about the framework. And I'll also be talking about how I perceive my perceptions of the poem, and also everything will be illustrated. We were asked to do this by this time, and I don't know, please take note of this. It will be in one of the following questions. So you're supposed to make a summary of everything I'm going to tell you. So I'll just ask a few questions for you to answer. I'll just be reading them out loud, okay? So my first question is, what is Wordsworth's philosophy about poetry, and how is it seen in the poem? Do you agree how I see it? Can you figure it out? What did I say? Yeah. Okay, and in the ending I talk about what I think the contrast between the ending and the beginning means. And do you agree with what I said, or do you think it could be something completely different? Give me some input. And the last one will just be an extra question. If you want to do this, you can do it. So yeah, it's optional. The question is, we were asked to make drawings of each stanza, as I said, and to help us understand the poem. But do you think, did they help you understand the poem? You can see them in the background. You're going to be able to see them in the background. But did it help you? I want to know. And I will be showing these drawings in this video too, just so you can see them on a full scale. I think that would be quite nice if you choose that question to be able to see them. So yeah, for now, have fun. Great work. We chose to talk about the poem The Solitary Reaper by William Wordsworth. And firstly, we'll just like to introduce the idea of the Romantic Age and the style and ideas of William Wordsworth. Romanticism is used to describe the expression of personal feeling and emotions. Romanticism is an international artistic and philosophical movement that flourished in the late 18th to early 19th century. Authors at the time had the sense that they were living in an age of literary renaissance and an intellectual climate where new things were possible. The idea was mostly likely inspired by the climate around them, since revolutions took place in the US and France. The poets of the time can be parted into two generations. The one who looked with amazement on what happened in France. They looked at what had happened and what was happening,
even gazed like back in time for simpler days. And then there were the ones who looked with, and then the ones who looked at what was happening or had happened and saw it as an inspiration for a better future. That the revolution was a mark for a new beginning. Nature was another great inspiration of the time, and it became like a great source of inspiration and the primary poetic subject. And one of the popular and like interesting poets at the time was William Wordsworth. He thought of poetry as something which came from experience, and that it was not an academic discipline. His style of writing was like aimed for the people, like the common people. And he wanted his poetry to be about the ordinary life, and that a poet, he also thought that a poet was like a man speaking to men. And he also like described poetry itself as a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. And the poem of William Wordsworth that we'll be talking about is the Solitary Reaper. The text is about the lyrical eye, who's like describing a woman who's singing while reaping. Her singing is compared to the song of a bird, and it apparently gives off a lot of emotions, because the lyrical eye can't really stop thinking about her singing. The poem also uses like a lot of adjectives, which kind of gives the poem more emotion, and I personally think it makes the poem become more vivid. It also has an interesting rhyme structure, like it's in a way that it frames the poem, and I think the beginning and the end are more similar to each other than the framework and the middle part, and like vice versa. Okay, so the first stanza of the poem feels quite light but also lonely, and this is a stanza like which describes the title of the poem, like the Solitary Reaper. The woman is out on the field reaping while being completely alone. It's quite detailed about her and her doings, but also the fact that she's doing all this by herself. And the fact that the poem is focusing on a simple country girl is not that weird for Wordsworth, actually. And as I mentioned, he wanted to write poetry about real life experience and for others to relate to his content, so this is probably why he chose, just like a farmer's girl instead of like a rich girl sitting in a beautiful dress or something. And also to add something I talked about before, the beginning isn't really focusing on anything abstract or feeling, but rather a person and their doings, and I will get more into this later. Okay, so the second stanza might seem as if it's like focused on just some random event, with birds and travelers, and snakes even, but rather these are like the description of the woman's song. This is the feeling and first impression she gives the lyrical eye. Specifically, I think the woman in this stanza is the birds, and the lyrical eye is the traveler who is in search for a haunt. And here the haunt being the woman and her welcoming notes, as he describes it. And the author is using these descriptions to describe the feeling of the lyrical eye and to get like the feeling that he gets from hearing her. And it's kind of like to set the scene of the experience. And then we have the third stanza, which is, I think, is quite abstract in some way. It like describes the thoughts and emotions of the lyrical eye and how they feel when listening to the woman singing. The lyrical eye describes time and wonder and like dwelling on what like they were actually hearing. And I feel as if the stanza like goes through time, and like it's describing something from the past and mentioning the present and wondering about the future. And as I mentioned earlier, the Romantic age had a thing for like romanticizing time. And Wordsworth was actually part of the authors who often looked back and what happened like in France and like the whole revolution. But like in the end of the stanza, he could be referring to some of the younger authors who were the ones who looked like the future and how can we make a better future out of experience. And then in the last stanza, we're like back in the real world. While the lyrical eye is talking about how he takes his song of the woman with him and like stores it in his heart, their heart. And the lyrical eye is like mounting up a hill when the song like of the woman put them in like almost a kind of trance. And the lyrical eye is just thinking about what her song was actually about, like then, now, and when. And the song really made the lyrical eye think, since they brought the song with them. And this may be because the song was actually like a symbol of poetry. Like Wordsworth is here describing poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, which also seems to be what the song has done to the lyrical eye. Like they're really feeling something. And this may as well just be a poem about what poetry actually feels like to Wordsworth himself, like a demonstration of it. And like just to sum things up and just talk about the poem, like I feel as the poem like develops through a day, but also kind of just like a small moment of a hike. Like the lyrical eye passes this singing woman for just a short moment, but her voice and song sets off like so strong emotions and memories for the lyrical eye, which makes this short moment feel like a whole day. And I feel as if we in a way connected with the nature and time with this poem. But also I feel like the poem is quite lonely, like most of the time. Like we are alone, even though we're together. I don't know. And did you notice the similarities between like the framework, you know, with stanza 1 and 4, and the middle part, the stanza 2 and 3? Like the one kind of what I talked about in the beginning in stanza 1, but like as I mentioned, the poem is parted into two, the framework and the middle part, and the framework was like where both of them were seen from more outside kind of perspective. It is still from the lyrical eye, yes, but we are hearing about the physical events rather than the emotional events, because like in the middle part we were focusing much more on this, like this song and the emotion it gives off, so, and like what the lyrical eye gets from the song. And I feel like also this is kind of contributing to the whole thing about this probably just a short moment feels like a whole day, because we are literally stretching this small moment out and framing it. That's almost like a piece of art. That also kind of occurs like a weird contrast in the framework, I feel like. Because like the beginning, it starts out with this lonely woman being introduced, and she's described singing, but it also said, like something it said was as if her song could have no ending, and this may mean that her work has no ending to it. So while her life keeps being hard and like lonesome, her work and singing brings like joy to others, because it seems as if the lyrical eye has the whole life in front of them, and they're taking this song and this feeling with them to dwell on it till the heart stops. Like he describes as putting it into his heart. Yeah, that's what I mean. Like I don't know if this may be like a comment on the upper class and the working class, and how the working class is actually doing so much for the ones who are fortunate. Or maybe it's like an addition to how the common folk inspires Wordsworth. And just if I had to comment something myself and like to say something, the poem is like describing beautiful music, and for myself, I think that beautiful music like does set my imagination off. Kind of makes me wonder and be more creative. Kind of how the lyrical eye is experiencing the song of the woman, and then I kind of think that is what like, music and poetry can do to you. It makes you wonder and makes you think and be more creative. Kind of just as Wordsworth described, like the whole power of poetry.